Well, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Laid Off Legends podcast, where we listen to layoff stories and relevant expertise with a focus on finding inspiration, guidance, and encouragement for the laid off professional community. I'm your host, Leo, a principal PM that was laid off from Microsoft last October. 155 days. That's what it took our next guest. 155 days of going through the layoff stages of grief, layoff recovery, job applications, ghostings, rejections, interviews, networking, follow-ups, and so much more. He's here to share his story. Michael, welcome to the Laid Off Legends podcast.
Leo, I appreciate it. Looking forward to talking with you.
It's so great to have you. I know we've spent some time trying to connect here, so I'm glad we're finally able to have a conversation.
Absolutely. I appreciate your flexibility.
I could see you flashing some gear there. What's going on over there?
Yeah, I'm a Georgia Tech alumni. My wife and I both went to Georgia Tech. That's where we met, ironically, in the laundry my second week of school. So it's a place near and dear to my heart.
That's amazing. Well, would love to hear your background. Why don't you bring our listeners into who you are and your journey thus far, even before we get into any type of layoff experiences?
Sure. My name is Mike Hennessy. I've been in the IT world over 30 years. I started off while I was at Georgia Tech working as a co-op for a division of GE that's not around anymore. After graduation, moved to Greenville, South Carolina, and had a couple entry jobs into IT where I did anything from IT help desk, desktop support, network engineering, you name it. I was kind of the one guy does everything in the office. And then I had an opportunity to get into leadership. I had done some project leadership already. And I realized that's what I really wanted to get into. So one of the larger engineering firms here in Greenville, it's Jacobs Engineering, gave me the opportunity to do that. I was there for 14 years, went through a lot of growth there, learned a lot of good things from a lot of good people. Then went to work for a chemical manufacturing company based out of Houston. Was there for 3 years and then made the jump to my last employer, Ingram Micro, where I was there for 7 years. Done a lot of things within the infrastructure space. I've run server teams, storage teams, networking teams, desktop support, help desk, you name it within that area of infrastructure and operations. And I've probably done something with it. So
it's impressive. It's not just the spectrum of your journey and responsibilities, but also I'm hearing a lot of flexibility as you've moved around to different types of companies, going from place to place. I'm sure there's something about adaptability there as well.
One of the things I learned real quickly is that when you talk about IT sometimes is very specific to industry, but when you get into the infrastructure side of it, it's really the same. So being able to move from industry to industry is really easy, in my opinion. But the other thing is the breadth of stuff I've done. When I was with Jacobs, they had a philosophy with all of their leadership that before you could move up, you had to move laterally at least 3 times, so that when you did move up, you had a better understanding of the big picture. And that's one of the things that I took from there. And it's really helped me move forward in my career is that breadth.
One of our previous speakers talked about the value of having diversity of experiences. It just makes you so much more adaptable as you move forward when it comes to career challenges.
Absolutely.
Let's lean in a little bit to your last role. What were you doing at Ingram Micro? What were your roles and responsibilities before the layoff? I think it'll help our audience understand your professional context.
I was the director of infrastructure and operations for what we called the Americas region. That was everything that we had within North and South America. We had operations in Canada, the US, Mexico, and I think 5 countries in South America. Plus, they gave me 2 offices over in Spain, which was one of the business units that we had never really integrated, and they wanted me to help get them integrated before we turned them over to their regional manager. So it wasn't just the Americas, but mostly. That team primarily was desktop support at the end of everything, but we also were the eyes and hands for all of the what I'll call central towers of infrastructure. So the server team, the network team, security, all of that worked through our teams because they didn't have people at all those different locations. So when they needed somebody to do something, my team did that. Through that, we were actually able to give several of them opportunities to move into those centralized towers over the years. And a couple of my guys went on to be senior level leaders within those other parts of the organization as well.
Are there any products or services that our folks would recognize if they saw it somewhere? Or because it sounds very, very infrastructure-ish out there. Yeah. What are some things that people could recognize that they could relate to?
So the tool that we use the most was ServiceNow. That's one of the larger help desk systems for those that may not know what it is. But also we were primarily a Cisco shop on the network side. We were using Meraki wireless technologies. Our servers were Dell. Our laptops and desktops were Dell. So those are the majority of the technologies we were dealing with.
But if you look back at your career at Ingram Micro, What were you the most proud of? What would you hang on the rafters, in that auditorium there saying, I did that?
It's funny because I can look at this two different ways. When I look at it from a business perspective, it's finding cost efficiencies or efficiencies in processes that help with cost, digging down into things like help desk statistics to find out, okay, what are we doing well and what aren't we doing and how can we improve that? So that was one of the big technological things or operational things, I'd say. The second thing, though, is team building. I really enjoy leading a team. And when I say that, we're all part of org charts at some point or another, and they're necessary for the organization. But when it comes time to do something, everybody on my team knew we were one team. If they needed me to crawl under a desk and pull cables, I'd do it. It doesn't matter what my title is. And because of that, I felt like they really bought in to what my philosophy was, and it helped us gel as a team. At one point, I had just the US, and my boss said, I want you to build the Americas region. And I had to go into each one of those regions and say, we're going to pull you in, but we're not just going to turn around and say, this is how we do it in the US, and this is how you're going to do it now. It was more a discussion with everybody on those teams. And I mean, everybody from the leadership on those teams to the individual contributors of how do you do X, Y, and Z, and how does that compare to how we're doing it elsewhere so that we can find the best possible solution for the company and build those synergies across the entire region. By the end of it, I had people in South America calling people in Canada. I had people in Spain calling people in the US. And it was a great feeling to see that team really come together and function as one cohesive unit rather than a bunch of pockets within the business.
What were some of the insights that you brought that were unique, that you believe formed that secret sauce when it comes to building great teams?
It's really making sure that everybody has a voice and that they're listened to. And that doesn't mean that every decision we make is going to be a democracy, but anytime we were going to implement something new or we had a new idea, no matter who brought it to me, I tried to present it to the entire team and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because I realized early on, as I moved up the chain, I didn't always have the best perspective of what was going on, and changes that I was proposing weren't always the best solution for us to be able to support the business. So by letting my team know what we're thinking about and giving them time to give us some feedback on it, and then having that possibly impact what we eventually did, made it easier for the team members to buy into it because they knew that we had given them the opportunity to give some feedback. And I truly feel like they felt like they were heard. It wasn't just a lip service. Hey, tell us what you think about this. Okay, we're going to go do the other. It was, no, we listened, and because they saw from time to time where we did change what we were doing based on what their feedback was.
It sounds like a real open culture of transparency and idea providing. I would assume that would increase the amount of ideas that are coming from all members of the team.
It did from time to time. Sometimes it took a while for people to believe that we really wanted to hear what they had to say. We had a real big hurdle there because when I came into this role, there had been a revolving door over the past 5 years where every year to 2 years, there was somebody new there. And I had to first build the trust of, hey, guys, I'm not going anywhere. I was in that role for 5 years. And after I'd been there a year or two, people actually started to believe that I wanted to hear what they had to say because I was planning on being there long term and making sure that things actually got implemented that way rather than saying, yeah, that sounds great. I'm leaving now and somebody else is going to come in and figure out how they want to do it.
You mentioned building trust. I think that's so powerful in today's environment. Let's lean into the culture a little bit at Ingram Micro before you left or while these experiences happened. Can you talk about what that culture was like with your team and the company overall?
When I joined Ingram Micro, it felt like, this is not always a good thing in business, but it felt like a family. And I've read some things that say when you hear that, that's a bad sign because inevitably there's going to be something that you're going to feel didn't go the right way, which happens. But what I felt like was the people were genuine. Everybody really cared about the next person, whether I was talking with one of the VPs in the business, whether I was helping somebody fix their laptop, whether I was talking with my team, which some of them had been there for 10 to 15 years, there was a sense of community and belonging within the company. And that was one of the things that really appealed to it. As time went on and the company grew, during COVID, we had exponential growth because we were a distributor of electronics and everybody needed that stuff. And we were one of Microsoft's largest licensing partners. During that growth period, the company started to realize they had to make some changes. And specifically within IT, they changed some of the platforms we were working on, and they started to focus on those platforms rather than some of the what I'll call bread and butter table stakes areas of IT. And as those changes started to happen, we started to see key people leave, and then we knew changes were coming. We just didn't know when they were. Some of us were going to be impacted by it.
And so at this point, layoffs start to come around. Could you walk us through that experience? Did the culture change when these layoffs started? How did the company actually handle that? You mentioned being very close to leadership. What did that look like?
We had some changes in the business first. IT wasn't the first impacted, and we saw some layoffs there, and some of them were surprising, to be honest with you. There were people that were pretty high up in the company. It was seen as, okay, they're retiring or they've decided to go a different direction, but that I think everybody reads through that pretty well and understands really what's going on. Then probably mid-year last year, my boss came to me and said, hey, or came to all of his directs and said, listen, there's going to be some changes in IT. There's going to be some restructuring. At some point later in this year, we're going to go through a reduction in force. We're going to do a layoff. So we need you to start thinking about who would be part of that layoff, who would be on the list. And we were kind of given a percentage of our teams that we needed to look for. And I hate to say this, I've been through this before from the leadership side. It's never a fun exercise. I have no problem terminating somebody for cause because they've done something. But when you're talking about laying somebody off because it's a numbers game and has nothing to do with what they've done, that's really hard to do. And it's really the worst part of being a leader, in my opinion. So we were going through that process, and then that process kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. Originally, it was going to be the beginning of October, then mid-October, beginning of November. And then we thought, okay, maybe they'll wait till after the first of the year because the holidays are coming up. About that time, my boss left. He decided he didn't like what was going on. He wanted to go someplace else, and he did. My interim the replacement for him was a guy I admired a lot. And then we were told, all right, this is going to happen the first Monday in December. And it's going to be about 20% of the IT workforce. We were all brought into a meeting the week of Thanksgiving saying, we're going to need your help getting us from where we are now. This is where we're going, which was either to outsource or offshore the IT resources within the infrastructure team and several of the others. And we're going to need your help doing that. So I walked out of that meeting probably a little naive, thinking, okay, well, I'm safe here. I don't have to worry about anything. And that just wasn't the case. After Thanksgiving, on Sunday night, about 9 o'clock, I get a meeting notice that I'm meeting with my boss and HR at 11 o'clock the next morning. And that's when the reality hit me. I mean, my wife had been saying, hey, do you think there's any possibility you're going to get hit with this? And I'm thinking, I don't think so. Everything I've heard sounds like I'm going to be around at least for another 3 to 6 months. I've got time, but it wound up not being the case in the long run.
Your story is unique because you got to see both sides of the table. You got to be part of the layoff planning, but then you were also laid off as well. How did that meeting go on Monday morning?
It's kind of funny because I knew what was happening that night. After I got the email, my wife and I had a lot of good conversations, probably 2 or 3 hours. We went to bed a lot later than we normally do because of it. I got up. I hadn't planned on going into the office. It was one of my remote days, but I went into the office. I took all of my extra hardware that I had because I was a tester for a bunch of stuff. I labeled it all. I packed up my office. And when it came time for the meeting, I knew what was going to be said. I'd been on the other side of the table. I know what was going to be said to me, and there was nothing I could do to change it. So there were a couple things that I felt a little salty about, I'll be honest, but that wasn't the right time to voice those. So I went into that meeting very peaceful, to be honest with you. And I think it actually surprised the people on the other side because they didn't expect me to be, I'm good, guys. I've got my office boxed up. I'm ready to walk out the door as soon as we're done. I'll go hand in my badge to the HR personnel and away we go. So that morning, by the time I got to the meeting, I knew what was happening. And I knew what the day was going to be like. And I think I prepared myself pretty well for it.
Walk us through your Zen, because that is actually unique. What was going through your mind? How were you preparing so by the time the layoff came, you handled it so gracefully?
I think, my wife is a little bit more realistic than I am at times. I look through rose-colored glasses. She was ready to have that conversation when I walked into the bedroom and said, you're not going to believe this. And we talked about the fact that it's a business decision. She helped me remember all those things that I told people every single time I've had to do this. It's not you. It's the business restructuring, the business decision. It's not based on performance. Some of the things that I mentioned that I was salty about, she said, you know what? You got to let those go because The person that is now your leader that's doing this may have told you one thing and is doing another, but they were put into that position. They inherited that. Somebody else handed them that. So having those conversations that night before really helped. Also, that next morning, it was kind of funny. About an hour before that meeting with HR, I was on a meeting with all my peers. We had a weekly touch base on Monday mornings. And I said, hey guys, this might be the last time I talk to y'all. So, it's been great working with you. I've got this meeting in a half hour. And they all went, okay, that's news to us. Hope that's not what's happening. Hope it's something else. But if so, at least I got a chance to say goodbye to some of those people.
Did you have time to close out any outstanding projects, or was this one where like, hey, by 5 o'clock today, you got to leave?
It was an immediate thing. I was a director within the company, and at that level, especially a director in IT, the company's policy was once the meeting is over, while you're in that meeting, actually your access is terminated. It's a coordinated effort. So I knew as soon as I saw the meeting, I knew that I was going to be done midday that day.
So what happened after the meeting? Did you go around the office telling people goodbye? How do you end your day?
I didn't want to make a big deal about it because I didn't know the entire list of who was being impacted and when they were going to be notified. So I did walk over to the local support guy that was on my team and said, hey, come to my office for a second. I want to show you something. I said, here's the hardware I have. This is who it needs to go to. Here's my regular laptop for you to put back into stock. I walked over to the HR manager's office, handed him my badge, and he was a good friend. He knew what was going on, obviously, but he was very gracious about it. Handed my badge, went back to my office, grabbed my box, and walked out the door.
Would you do anything differently?
I really was happy with the way I handled the day. I don't know that I've done anything differently. It feel like because I knew what was happening, I was able to kind of write my own script for the day. I could have been petulant. I could have stayed at home and not gone into the office that day as they expected, and then have to worry about taking stuff over there and taking my sweet time doing it. But through some of the conversations I'd had with my wife the night before, it's better just to move on. In the moment, don't focus on what's going on. Just get through it. Yes, there are going to be emotions. Yes, there's going to be bad days, bad moments. We'll deal with those as those come up. Just make the best of this. I wanted to go out on a high note. I didn't want to burn bridges. I didn't want to walk out like I was pissed off because there are a lot of people there that I do respect. It was a case of I wanted to be able to walk out with my head held high and hold on to the dignity I had.
There are a lot of lessons there. What advice would you give to folks who are being laid off, but still have anger, resentment, but have to manage that closing experience? What advice would you give them?
Take a deep breath. That's the best thing is take a deep breath, count to 10. Give yourself a second to reset. Realize that it's not something you did. It's something that's being done to you per se. And understand that in the long run, this is probably going to be a good thing for you. Every time a door closes, another one opens. There are so many cliches you can use here, but a lot of them are very true when it comes to this. For me, this wound up being a blessing, both the timing of it and the fact that it happened. I think were a good thing for me. And when you're able to take that step back and really reflect on it objectively, which is hard to do if you're caught off guard. Once you're able to do that, you're going to be able to come to a much better peace of mind. I've had guys that are almost twice my size break down into tears during one of these conversations. And as being on that side of the table where you're delivering this, you've got to be as graceful and empathetic as possible. But at the same time, you've got a job you've got to do, even though it's not enjoyable. And for me, having that unique situation where I've been on that side of the table, including during this action, helped me have that different perspective a little bit sooner than maybe if I'd have been surprised by it.
Thank you for sharing with such openness. You described your role as something that was incredibly networked. You had so many people under you. You had, the geographies of the US and Spain, but then you wake up the next morning, no meetings, no calls, no customers. What'd you do? What was that first morning like after your layoff?
So that first morning, first of all, when I went home that day, the first thing I did was I posted something to LinkedIn just saying, as has happened to a lot of people in my network, I've been hit by a layoff. If anybody has any suggestions and or knows of anybody who's hiring, let me know. And that day, there were a lot more discussions with my wife, a lot more crying. I'll be honest, frustration, everything. The next morning I got up, and normally my wife gets up before me, but I was the first one up, and I got my cup of coffee and I sat down on our couch. We sit down and we watch the news while we drink our coffee. And while I was there, I went into LinkedIn just to look around, and the number of people that commented on that post and the things that they said, while the day before it was tears of frustration and anger, that next morning I was in tears of joy because there were so many heartfelt personal messages there of how I had impacted somebody else's life, whether it was at Ingram or someplace else. And they knew that I would land somewhere and be better off for it. And again, I can't express the amount of joy that brought me. And made me feel really good about the work that I had done while I was there and elsewhere up to that point. It it was a really uplifting situation, and it probably changed how I approached the next couple days altogether because it would have been really easy for me to sit there and sulk and brood. But what it did is it gave me it reinvigorated me to take that next step and say, okay, where do I go from here?
Wow, your community really stepped up in terms of not just validating the work and the impact that you had on them, but then also wishing you well as you move to the next chapter.
Absolutely. And like I said, I can't emphasize how important through this entire process, all the way through to today, networking is. But it was just amazing how my network reached out and lifted me up at a time where I was very low.
Very powerful. And we'll talk about the power of community because that's something so important. Take us to the next chapter of your journey. So you've started on high notes. How did you start your journey looking for roles, networking with people, assessing your skills, looking back? How did you take that leap from, okay, I'm now laid off to, okay, what's next?
Did probably the same thing everybody does right after getting laid off or leaving a job. I jumped into LinkedIn, I updated everything, I updated my resume, and then I started looking for jobs. LinkedIn was my primary source for the job search. I did look at some of the other boards, but LinkedIn, there was a lot of duplication, so I primarily went there. It was trying to figure out, how am I going to do this? I've been in a very regimented activity my entire life working in the corporate world. So it was, you get up at this time, you have your breakfast, you head into the office, you have lunch, you finish the day out, you come home. All that was out the door. For the first time, other than when I've been on vacation, this is the first time I have been unemployed since before I went off to college. So it was a very different feeling. And I quickly realized I needed a routine. I couldn't just let myself figure it out as I went. So I said, okay, I've been going to the gym 1 or 2 times a week. That's going to be 3 or 4 times a week now. So I'm going to get up. I'm going to have my coffee with my wife like we always do. I'm going to get my daughter out the door to school. I'm going to head to the gym for a half hour to an hour every day, or as many days during the week as I feel like I can. I'd then come home, eat my breakfast, and then I'd jump in for an hour or two doing the job search. And that was kind of that next step. And then there were plenty of things to do around the house. Trust me, there's a list. But I also signed up for Uber just to give myself something outside of the norm to do to kind of break up the monotony. But going back to going to the network and how did I start finding that job? I started reaching out first to the people that I had networked with over the years that maybe I hadn't kept up with and saying, hey, how are you doing? This has happened to me. Is there anything, you know of, or, especially for people that work for companies that I looked up to. Also here in the Greenville community, we have a great networking resource. It's called Tech After 5. A little shout out to Phil Yanov and his team, where it's for the IT community to get together once a month, and it's a purely social networking event. And I've been involved with them probably for a good 15 years. And I made sure I was signed up for that next meeting. And I was going to go. Then I started looking for other opportunities for networking. How else can I get out there? And those were probably in that first week, those were the things that I focused on, was refreshing everything, getting back in touch with people, having conversations. Anybody who wanted to talk, I'd get on the phone with them. It was just getting yourself out there as much as possible.
Take us a little bit into the networking. For many of us, when we hear networking, we hear a badge saying, my name is Mike. Really bad coffee in a corner and people just shaking hands and exchanging cards. What did you do that was different from that? Is that image wrong? What is true authentic networking and how did it work for you?
That name badge and a bad cup of coffee or a glass of beer or whatever the group does is part of it. It really is. And I did meet quite a few new, interesting people over the last 6 months by going to those events, some of which I'm sure I will keep in touch with, and in the future, we may be able to work together again. The other thing, though, was, and again, this was through one of Phil's other things that he does. I attended a networking event where a gentleman who is seen as the forefront of the way LinkedIn looks at posts and the algorithms. He's the authority on that. His talk was about, if you're trying to use LinkedIn to network with people, don't just go in and like a comment, like an article. If you like it, put a comment out there, and make it a meaningful comment, not just great article. Talk about what you liked about it. If you haven't posted anything to LinkedIn ever, figure out something to post, because every time you post something, a certain percentage of your network sees that immediately. And then if one of them looks at it or sits on it for a few seconds, their network then sees it. If they comment on it, the same thing happens. And actually, when they comment, a large percentage of their network sees it. It's kind of interesting how some of those algorithms work. And I think that was one of the big things for me. Was about 3 months in, and this is how we met. I decided, I went to a networking event, and we were exchanging ideas of, okay, what are you doing? How are you doing it with somebody? And it made me think there are a lot of people out there that might benefit from what I've learned while being laid off. And I started writing posts and putting them out on LinkedIn. And the first one I put out there, it was huge. The number of responses I got, had over 200,000 impressions in just a week. So the number of people that saw it and then responded back was just overwhelming. And I think I hit a nerve, and I said, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. And I think I've got now about 15 different posts out there. So that in itself opened up doors, because I had new recruiters reaching out to me. I had one job opportunity that didn't work out, that it was a CIO who reached out to me, and we connected. I didn't realize who he was until our first conversation. And he said, my CEO saw one of your posts and sent it to me, took a screenshot and sent it to me and said, you need to call this guy. So getting out there and doing things like that are another great way of meeting people and networking that I had no idea about before I started this journey. And I think that's really been one of the biggest things that helped along the way, was getting me out in front of people, getting opportunities opened up. It just really made a big difference.
I will say that it has. That was how we met. I caught
Yep.
one of your posts, and it's not just that you're posting. I recall the post being thoughtful, empathetic. It was grounded in your experience. It wasn't telling other people what to do. It was really just sharing who you were and what you were going through. And that is a difference that for sure we need to call out, which is you find everything everywhere online telling you what to do, but nobody tells you who they are. And
Yeah.
that was something that shone through in your posts, that this is your experience, this is what you're going through, and if it helps, here you go. And that generosity was really what drew me to you. And so thank you so much for sharing that so authentically.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So before we move into next chapter, would love to talk about your coping strategies, because 155 days is a really, really long time. It is up in the morning, at night. You talked about the importance of routine, but with every sunrise, there's a sunset. With every sunny day, there's a rainy day. Could you walk us through some of those days that were tougher than others, and how did you cope with those, especially throughout this journey?
Absolutely. There were a couple times along that journey where I thought, okay, hey, that interview went really good. This is going to lead to something, only to hear back a day or two later that they were moving on with somebody else. First time you hear that, it's okay, no big deal. It just wasn't a good fit. And I've been a hiring manager before, so I know how that can be. When you hear that 2 or 3 times in a row is where it gets really tough. Or at least it did for me. I'm very, very blessed that my wife is very in tune to me, and she did a great job of, whenever I got down into one of those lower moments, of drawing out of me what was going on, what was I feeling. Let's face it, guys don't talk about their feelings well. I'm typical in that realm. But one of the things I've learned through this process is you've got to have somebody or a group of people, your community, that you can talk to. You got to be able to do that, because if you don't, it's going to continue to build and bottle up inside you, and you're going to have a really bad day at some point. So for anybody out there that's still going through this or goes through this in the future, figure out who your support network is. And that's not just your job finding support network, but it's your emotional support network, your family, your friends. Find people that you can sit down and talk to about how you're feeling, especially on those bad days. But not only on the bad days, you got to talk about the good days too. You got to celebrate those days. But it's really important to have somebody you can you can, and can then pull you back and balance you back out so that you helps you get back on your feet a little bit quicker.
Were there any other practices that you found particularly helpful in days like that?
For me, getting back in shape and going to the gym helped a lot. Everybody hears the term runner's high. It's the endorphins you get from exercising. And it was something that honestly I hadn't done in years. I'm now in the best shape I had been the past 20 years because of being able to do this. But what it enabled me to do was take some of that negative energy and have an outlet for it. That was a really big one. The other one that I found that was really useful that I wasn't expecting is I'm big on Apple products, and I've got an Apple Watch, an Apple phone, Apple TV, everything. And every once in a while my watch would say, hey, it's time for a mindful moment. And it was kind of like a mini meditation. And it might be a minute, it might be 2 minutes, whatever. Just making myself actually do those sometimes was a big help because it helped me recenter. And if I was having a bad day, especially, it gave me a chance to calm down a little bit and just focus on me for a second and my breath or whatever the lesson was in it, so that I could then try and push some of those other things out of my mind.
You really touched on some very important parts: the mental, the spiritual, the emotional, the community, all of these things that we need. One of our previous guests, Dr. Shule, talks about the pieces of the pie and how our lives are these things. And if your life is only the work slice and that drops, you will really have a tough time because there's nothing left. Now, our lives are all these other things, but because we don't invest in them, I'm really happy you shared that, which was I had neglected this for such a long time, but now I was able to get back into it because of these things. And now you're in a better place than you were before. It's such an interesting cascade of events when we pay attention.
It's even funnier than that. So this past weekend, my youngest daughter's graduating from high school, and we had her party this past Saturday. And we had family in town till Tuesday midday, and then we had something else big for her on Wednesday at school. It was from Wednesday to Wednesday, we've been really, really busy with stuff. And I hadn't been able to get to the gym. And Thursday morning, my wife went and she got home and says, so how was your gym? I said, I didn't go today. I figured you're just taking the week off. I'm going to get back Monday. She says, no, you're going tomorrow. She said, I can't tell you how different I feel. This is her talking, just by going, and you're going tomorrow. So I got up the next morning and I went, and I got home. She says, how was it? I said, you're absolutely right. I feel so much better. It was 30 minutes on a treadmill and a little bit of weightlifting. And it just made me feel better. What I'm hoping and what I'm fearing in some ways is as I get back into work over the next couple of weeks, keeping that up, making sure that stays part of the routine, finding a way to take the time for it, because it really is important.
Something tells me that there's someone in your household that probably won't let that go. That will remind you constantly to keep those behaviors up.
Like I said, she balances me in so many different ways.
That is so awesome. So Mike, this is amazing because we've walked through this journey here. Bring our audience to this call and this amazing opportunity that you're in right now, because of course you're applying, you're networking and things like that. But at some point there was a spark. Walk us through that and how that happened.
It was kind of funny. Same activity I always do. I was looking through the new job postings and one of them pops up and it says, you got a connection at this company. And I look at the name of the company. I know it immediately because I just 2 weeks ago talked to this gentleman about, hey, is anything going on with your company? How are you doing there? He was a gentleman that had been at Ingram, and I sent him a note saying, hey, do you know anything about this position or who the hiring manager is? And he said, give me 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, I had a call back from him saying that this is a direct to the CIO position. I just talked to him. He's going to be reaching out to you in the near future. Within 2 hours of that, I was on the phone with the hiring manager, the CIO of this company, and we talked for 45 minutes. So I hadn't even put up an application in at this point. And I'd already had a very good conversation with the CIO. And he was going on vacation the next week, so he was going to have HR reach out to me and do their screening part and do a couple other things. Long story short, over the course of about 3 or 4 weeks, I had 3 or 4 conversations with different people at the company and a couple more with him. And he called me up and said, hey, I just want to touch base. How are you doing? How's your job search going? By the way, I would like to tell HR to put an offer together for you in the next couple of days. And the only hesitation I had at that point was I hadn't been on site. I hadn't actually met people face to face. And I said, I really would like to come on site first. He says, oh, no problem. We'll set that up. And we did. And in the long run, that's where I'm at. I'm going to be working for a company called Telamon as their director of infrastructure. So
congratulations. That's an amazing story. One of the things I'm really happy to hear is I'm a huge fan of how micro moments all add up. The compounding effect, and how in one phone call you were able to share these things. But that one phone call was honed by all the other conversations that you've had.
Absolutely.
That conversation with that hiring manager who happens to be an alum of your previous company, that conversation was honed by the relationships you built at Ingram. Like, it's such an interesting cascade when we look at these big moments. But then if you break it down, it's really the addition of all those small moments that we didn't take for granted. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It really was. You know, you don't realize what your long-term ramifications of your actions are until you get down a road somewhere. And that can be good and bad, positive and negative. I truly believe that the relationships I've built over the last 20 years are what got me to where I am today, whether that's people that I've worked with, I've worked for, who have worked for me, mentors who have given me sage advice, all of that stuff. Like you said, those little pieces all come together sometimes to bring you to where you are today. I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason. Everything that you do and has done around you does add up over time. Like you said, those little things. And in this case, it was a true blessing.
So we always ask this from every guest. What are you doing right now to impact your piece of the planet?
Oh my gosh. When I look at our piece of the planet, what is our legacy going to be? I think of our children. My daughter is a high school graduating. She just finished. Right now, I'm focusing on her and my family. That has to be number one because that's what's gotten me ultimately where I am today. And my wife, I mentioned I was a co-op when I was in college. The reason I did that was because the woman who's my wife now encouraged me to go do that. I wouldn't be where I was today without her. And so I'm trying to make sure that I prepare my youngest to go off to school and be ready and be a good, productive member of society. Other than that, I'm continuing to focus on the networking. One of the things I've decided is I want to continue to help people. You know, I was very passive with it in the past couple of years where I'd go to some of the events that I would normally attend, but I wasn't really doing much. I was just talking to people I already knew. I'm going to go to one more of the Tech After 5 here in Greenville just because before I leave town. But I've already started looking into what types of activities are there in my new town that I can get involved with. I'm already talked with a couple of the members of my new team, and I'm going to make sure I get to know them and you know, how can I help them with their careers? Because there have been so many people that have helped me in mine. I want to kind of repay that, pay it forward with them so that they can then go do that again. But for me, that's going to be a big part of it, is continuing to try and be involved in any way that I can and helping other people that are going through something like this.
Thank you for doing that, Mike. It's so valuable because at the end of the day, you do have to give back. It just comes back to you in those types of ways. Rapid fire questions as we wrap this up here. Best career advice that you've received so far?
If you wait until you're ready to make a change, you'll never make a change. And that one actually came from a leader that I saw very little eye to eye with, but she said that one time in a meeting and it stuck with me. You can't just sit back on your laurels and wait for things to happen. You got to take that leap of faith sometimes and challenge yourself.
Your go-to piece of advice for someone on day one of their layoff?
Take a breath. Take a moment to let the process roll. It's okay to grieve. You're going to do it, but take a deep breath and just try and refocus yourself.
The most valuable skill you've discovered about yourself through this entire experience?
Vulnerability. Number one, being able to be vulnerable with my wife, which you'd think would be automatic, but when it comes to work things, you know, things that I'm not a very emotional person at times, but being able to talk about my emotions and be vulnerable with it has been something I've really enjoyed learning how to do. And I'm looking forward to continue learning as I move forward.
Any piece of advice that you have for our laid off professional community?
Network. Get out there and talk to people. It's a cliche to say it's who you know, not what you do. But in the long run, it is a big part of it. In today's job market, getting past the AI chatbots that look at resumes and whatnot can be very daunting. Look for where your connections are. Look for second level connections that you can go to your first and say, hey, I see you know somebody at this company. Can you get me a conversation with them? I think that's really important.
Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate your generosity in not just your conversation today, but even your writing. I can't wait to see your writing on our Laid Off Legends publication. So I'm still waiting for that, and I'm going to push you on that. But no, thank you. This has been absolutely amazing. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Everyone, thank you so much for spending time with us today. If you enjoyed this, please like and rate to help us get more exposure. And if you have questions or comments, please leave them below. I answer those personally. And if you have questions for Mike, please consider joining our Skool community. He's going to be out there answering questions. You'll have links on the screen to our stories playlist. And if you'd like to meet other professionals and discover resources as you navigate your layoff and career journey, consider joining our private and free Skool community. The links will be in below. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.